Hello guys, in this video I will teach you on how to define a Dart class. So Dart is an object-oriented language. It supports object-oriented programming features like classes, interfaces, and etc. A class in terms of OOP is a blueprint for creating objects. A class encapsulates data for the object. Dart gives built-in support for this concept called class. So, how to define a class? So, here is the syntax of a class. Use the class keyword to declare a class in Dart. A class definition starts with the keyword class, followed by the class name, and the class body enclosed by a pair of curly braces. The rules for identifiers must be considered while naming a class. A class definition can include the following. Fields. A field is any variable declared in a class. Fields represent data pertaining to objects. Setters and getters. Allows the program to initialize and retrieve the values of the fields of a class. A default getter or setter is associated with every class. However, the default ones can be overridden by explicitly defining a setter or getter. Constructors. Responsible for allocating memory for the objects of the class. Functions. Functions represent actions an object can take. They are also at times referred to as methods. These components put together are termed as the data members of the class. So here is an example of a class. The example declares a class car. The class has a field name engine. The display is a simple function that prints the value of the field engine. So, how to create an instance of the class? Here is the syntax on how to create an instance of the class. Var space the object name is equal to class name and the arguments. This statement shows on how to instantiate the car class. So first, var, then the variable object is equal to car, open and close parentheses, engine1. Accessing attributes and functions. A class attributes and functions can be accessed through the object. Use the dot notation called as a period to access the data members of a class. For example, if you want to access the field in your class, for example, the engine field, use this statement, object.fieldName or the engine field. To access a function, for example, object.function name or display function. So take a look at the following example to understand how to access attributes and functions in Dart. So in here, we define a class car, string engine is equal to E1001, function void display print engine. And then we create an instance of the car. Then we call the function display. And if you run your application, the output is E1001. Next is the Dart constructors. A constructor is a special function of the class that is responsible for initializing the variables of the class. Dart defines a constructor with the same name as that of the class. A constructor is a function and hence can be parameterized. However, unlike a function, constructors cannot have a return type. if you don't declare a constructor, a default no argument constructor is provided for you. So here is the syntax of the Dart constructor. The class name, then the parameter, open and close curly braces. And here is the example of the car class. So in our example, we created a car constructor inside of the car class. And inside of the car constructor, we specify a parameter which is string engine. And then inside of the car constructor, there is a print statement that prints the value of engine. And in our main function, we instantiate the car class and we assign a value for its parameter, which is E1001. And the output of this is E1001. Next, the this keyword. The this keyword refers to the current instance of the class. Here, the parameter name and the name of the class field are the same. Hence, to avoid ambiguity, the class field is prefixed with the this keyword. The following example explains the same. Here is the example. In our class car, we define a variable engine outside of the car constructor. So inside of the car constructor, we define a string engine. So in here, as you can see, they are the same. So to avoid ambiguity of these two variables, for our field which is outside of the car constructor, we put this before its name and equal to engine. So that means that engine represents the outside variable engine of the constructor car. Then equal to engine, which is the parameter of the car constructor. And then we print the value of the engine. And the output is the engine is E1001. Dart class, getters and setters. Getters and setters, also called as accessors and mutators, allow the program to initialize and retrieve the values of the class fields respectively. Getters or accessors are defined using the get keyword. Setters or mutators are defined using the set keyword. A default getter or setter is associated with every class. However, the default ones can be overridden by explicitly defining a setter or getter. A getter has no parameters and returns a value. And the setter has one parameter and does not return a value. So here is the syntax of a getter. Return type get identifier. For the syntax of setter, set identifier. Example. So we created a class student and we define two fields, which is string name and int age. Then we define a getters, string get space stud name, then return name. Another is void set stud name string name as the parameter, then this dot name is equal to name. Then another function for setters. So void set stud age and a parameter age as integer, then a conditional expressions that evaluate if the age is less than or equal to 0. If the age is less than or equal to 0, print age should be greater than 5. Otherwise, this dot age is equal to age. Then another function for the getters. Int get stud age return age. So in our main function, we instantiate the student class. In our second statement, we set the value of the stud name. And then for the third statement, we set the value for the age. And then for the fourth statement, we printed the value of the stud name. And the last statement, we printed the value of the age. Then if we run our application, the result will be age should be greater than 5, mark, and null. Class inheritance. Dart supports the concept of inheritance, which is the ability of a program to create new classes from an existing class. The class that is extended to create newer classes is called the parent class or superclass. The newly created classes are called the child or the subclasses. A class inherits from another class using the extends keyword. Child classes inherit all properties and methods except constructors from the parent class. So here is the syntax. Class, child class name extends the parent class name. So in our example, we created a parent class named shape. And inside of our class, we created a function, or we define a function named calculate area. And inside of that function, print calling calc area defined in the shape class. Then afterwards, we created a class circle that extends shape class. In our main function, we instantiate the circle class and we call the function cal area. As you can see, we did not call the parent class, but we are able to display the print calling calc area defined in the shape class using the child class. So that's all. Thank you for watching. God bless everyone.